Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you had a satisfying lunch and are ready for our next opportunity to have the afternoon plenary presentation. And it's with great delight that I will just introduce all four of them to you in a brief fashion and let them say more about themselves. I hate when introductions take up more time than they should. But we have Llewellyn Barkan, who's president and CEO for the New York City chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And we asked each of these folks to speak a bit from a perspective, so caregiving is her perspective. We have George Getzel, who's a professor emeritus of Hunter College School of Social Work, and he's going to touch on all that he's learned in his experiences as an activist and an advocate. Renee Sullivan, who maintains a private practice and is a retired associate professor of the Columbia School of Social Work, and she'll share some perspectives from her role as a clinician. And last but not least, Martha Adams Sullivan, who's executive director at Fordham-Tremont Community Mental Health Services Center, will share thoughts that grow out of her work in the field of aging and mental health, and particularly as an administrator. Don't hold them to anything that I just said. I know that they are going to speak in ways that help to provide lots of insights and opportunities. So before I turn the stage over, I'm a stickler on this. Cell phones, ringers off, please. Thank you. Llewellyn?
Thank you, Margaret. Can you all hear me in the back? Everybody can hear me? Okay, good. Lots of nodding. Okay. First, let me introduce you to my mom. She's in here with my two grandchildren. It was taken on her 80th birthday. So I'll be speaking about her a little bit today since I was her caregiver. And we thought it'd be nice to have her picture up on the screen. Let me start by saying that some years ago when I worked at City Hall, I was asked to present in an international women's organization as a surrogate for Rudy Giuliani. And I prepared a presentation that started with a list of all the things that women shared, all the roles we played to try to transcend the cultural differences, because the entire audience were a group of Japanese women. And there was an interpreter. The point that I was making was that no matter how different our lives were and how separate we were geographically, we actually shared a lot of different things. So the roles that I'd had over the years as I was creating my presentation, I reminded myself I'd been a grandchild and a grandparent, a mother and a daughter. I'd been a student and a teacher. I was a boss and been an employee. I have been a spouse, am a spouse, friend, neighbor, volunteer, advocate. We play so many roles. And all of them have their individual challenges and their individual rewards. But these all paled in comparison to those I faced when I took on the role of my mother's caregiver. It was an astonishing experience, and I'm about to tell you a story. But as I tell it, I would like you all to think about the following. If with my resources, my education, my experience, my network, my family support, I was challenged at this level, what about the rest of us? In December 2009, I flew to Florida and moved my 86-year-old mother from her apartment to a local assisted living. It was her choice, against my better judgment and my advice, which she never took. She wanted to stay in Florida. I wanted to bring her back to New York. She'd been there about 10 years on her own after my dad died. And a short time, about 10 months after I moved her into this assisted living, her cancer recurred. She went through a round of chemotherapy, and her dementia became profoundly worse. And I had that emergency call that we all worry about. For a very brief period after I flew down to Florida, I considered letting her play it out in Florida, let her stay down there. And that was the decision that I very quickly reversed when I got the first $10,000 bill for 2 weeks of a private aid, which was added to her caregiving services in addition to hospice, which she was then on, and the services and support of the staff in the home. So with the help of a local hospice social worker, who I will tell you really I hope that will definitely go to heaven, I managed to get a plan together to bring my mom back to New York. While the planning and organization of everything to that point had been extremely challenging and expensive and frustrating, it was a walk in the park compared to what was coming. So in December 2010, I started to make arrangements to bring my mom home to Florida. First thing I did was I called Delta Airlines and told them I needed oxygen, and they informed me that if I wanted oxygen on the plane, I had to use their service. So being the good planner that I am, I called and made the arrangements, and I paid for everything. And the night before the flight, I organized everything at my mom's assisted living, and I flew down from New York, and our flight was delayed, as these things will be. And I had about 3 hours sleep when I arrived at the nursing home to pick her up in her wheelchair, put her in the van, and get her to the airport. And when we arrived at the gate, the agent told us that she was concerned about our oxygen, and they called 3 agents over to examine it because they had decided that what we were really carrying was a bomb. And it was truly a moment out of a Woody Allen movie, and just the beginning. When we went into the security area, one of the TSA agents came over and examined my mother very carefully, patting her down. She was very gentle. And then she announced to me, sort of in a way that I think is sort of, she tried to be sweet. She said she needed to examine my mom's bottom. And I suggested to her that she go very carefully, because my mom was wearing diapers. It was a moment, as all these things generally are. With all of the excitement, when I finally boarded the plane, with the help of all the folks that managed to get my mother on the plane, when we got her seated, she was very excited to be on the plane. She'd been in the home for some time. She seemed to be more alert. And as the plane took off, she celebrated our departure by singing "Come Fly With Me" at the top of her lungs. She has a lovely voice, by the way. I mean, she had a beautiful voice. And in fact, she was, and some people were amused. I don't think I was one of them. Some people were not so amused. We were in first class, so I felt a little more entitled to this experience. The rest of the flight, once I told her, by the way, that they had a policy against singing on the plane, she was annoyed, but she agreed to comply, which I thought was very helpful. I had brought a private aide with me who I'd put in a different part of the plane, and we had a fairly calm flight until about 3/4 of the way through. And then for reasons I still don't remember what happened, something must have happened, she said, she became a little bit more agitated. And she turned to me and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "You know, I'm your daughter." And she said, "Impossible." And the social workers that have worked with me, most of whom work in my agency, the subtext, by the way, for my presentation is I've become my own client, which is what this is really about, had taught me over this period not to argue with my mother, which was getting out of some old bad habits. So I said, "Your daughter is in the back of the plane, and she will be here as soon as the plane lands." And that calmed her down a little bit, but you know, mother-daughter relationships, they're a little weird. So a few minutes later, I couldn't help it. You know, I said, "Why can't I be your daughter?" I'm sort of annoyed. And she said to me, she said, "You couldn't possibly be my daughter," she said. "My daughter," she said, "is beautiful and intelligent and successful, and look at you." I swear, that's verbatim. We didn't talk much on the rest of the flight. But I did take a good look at myself, and I'm here to tell you that I looked down, and this is what I saw. I had on my old jeans on my 2 hours of sleep. I had a white shirt on. I had a big stain from my mother's Boost breakfast that morning. I had my glasses for reading, and my shoes were off because my feet were killing me. And I was exhausted. And I remember thinking to myself that the person she remembered really didn't exist, that in all these years that she'd been ill and becoming increasingly ill, I had become a grandma. You know, it was really a period of evolution for both of us. And so I tried to think back to the person I used to be, innovative, entrepreneurial, full of energy, and I didn't feel that way at all. I was already exhausted. But, you know, this was the easy part of the story. The transfer to the nursing home in New York was actually pretty easy. The people at the home were terrific. They greeted us warmly, and I got her into bed that night, and I was so relieved, and I thought, okay, that's done. I don't have to worry about this anymore. Following morning, I drove back up. I had changed my clothes and showered and had some rest. And I went to see how my mom was doing, and she looked very relaxed and peaceful and happy, and she knew who I was. And then I got called to the finance office at the nursing home. You'd think I'd be expecting this, right? And I was handed a very lovely woman, handed me a big packet of documents, forms, and 2 pages of a checklist in sort of 4-point font for me to make sure that I had all these documents, all my ducks in a row, so that I could apply for Medicaid. My mother had run down her assets. She hadn't had any money for years, so I thought no problem at all. And, you know, I went home. And I started to work on this project. And within an hour, maybe 40 minutes, I was completely besides myself. I had no idea what I was up against. Companies that had policies that my mom had held had gone out of business. Policies had lapsed. Assets had been sold. My mother's records were impossible to organize. The definitions on the forms were, I'm sure you all know this, I see a lot of nodding, completely confusing when I could understand them at all. And the agency staff that I called, and these were largely not necessarily people who represent agencies in this room, these were agencies that are outside of this territory, actually, but when I called them, they were, after I got them on the phone, and I got the right phone number, and I sat on hold for 3 hours. And I waited. More nodding. I see more nodding. It was an astonishingly frustrating experience. And when I got back to my office the following morning, the entire task felt so overwhelming that, like many of our clients, I did the right thing and I reached out to my own staff, which is how I became my own client. Jed Levine, who's our program director, our executive VP, and who's sitting here today, suggested an expert that could work with me and help me put together some sort of record that will get us to the next step. And the process was, I knew, going to be time-consuming, and it was frustrating, it would be expensive, and for about 3 weeks, I was in a state of complete shock. 2 parts to it. One was the task itself, and the other is what an idiot I had been, not to force my mother to help me put her documents together. Her resistance to allowing me to handle her financial records over the years, to get involved. I'd been very lazy. I hadn't really forced the issue, and I was paying for that now. It felt like penance. So now I had hours on hold calling the Veterans Administration, and that was after I located the right number. More hours spent tracking down her bank statements, which apparently had been sent to some very remote country overseas, and was in a vault way below the ground, and would take at least 6 weeks and $400 to get out. Maybe if I could get them. Endless time calling insurance companies and former landlords and paying old bills that had been sitting in boxes collecting dust for so many years. And as I waded through these files, mostly in tears, it all felt like the penance that I had just, why didn't I pay more attention? Why did I allow this to happen? The process took over a year to complete, and she was finally approved, and she died 2 months later. But even after she died, there were 2 agencies that called me. One of them, even after I sent the death certificate, continued to call and ask me for things. And when I insisted that they had sent the certificate, 3 times I had that happen. Another agency called to request funds and refused to acknowledge that she was no longer here. It was a surrealistic nightmare, and it brought me new insights on the challenges that we face as the experts, the advocates, and the representatives for the agent community. If I couldn't handle this with my resources and with these experts at my side, how can someone who doesn't speak English as a first language? What about someone whose experience in another country with government is so frightening that they're afraid to make that call to an agency? How about people who don't have financial support, family support, or who are living alone in a community that may have forgotten all about them? There was a time that I thought that these problems were for someone else. But what I learned in the role of caregiver is that these problems were for all of us. And we will, many of us who have not already been there, face these very same problems personally, and almost certainly will be called upon professionally to try to make life easier for people. That's the call to action. We must find ways to change the system, to prepare our clients to be caregivers, not only by being kind, but by knowing what they're going to need. And notwithstanding today's debate, and it's a hot debate again today on healthcare in this country, regardless of how that goes, we have to encourage all elected officials to make everything easier and faster for all of us before the sheer number of people who are aging overwhelms all of us. So I ask us all in our various roles, in our various organizations, to consider what role we can play in creating a rational system that benefits our clients and benefits us all in the future. So let me close by thanking you all on behalf of my mom for taking time to hear my story and saying how much I do and our team at the Alzheimer's Association does. Look forward to working with you to solve this and so many other problems. Thank you.
George Getzel. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm just going to read my statement. I come today to you as a 70-year-old man who has been a professor of social work and a gerontologist. I retired as a full professor at 60 because I could, and 32 years in academia was quite enough, unless you enjoy toxicity and self-punishment. In retirement, I taught part-time in the universities. Students have always been a joy in my life. At 67, I decided that was it. No more part-time teaching and consulting. Retirement is not cessation, but choices. One of the benefits of the late life is to number our days and make choices of how we wish to spend those days with spouse, children, and now for me, a granddaughter who's today 10 weeks old. I also want to deepen my spiritual, my survival strategies in the face of the triadic tragedies of human existence: illness, death, meaninglessness, elaborated by Viktor Frankl. Various options are open to us as survival strategies in late life. 1, beneficence, caring for loved ones and others. 2, rationalism, seeking the best information to handle healthcare, finances, housing, recreation, etc. 3, spiritual and artistic exploration, seeking beliefs, images, and practices to cope with aging's challenges. And finally, 4, heroicism, challenging the obstacles and indignities of late life by an active stance in the world for oneself and others. A weaker alternative survival strategy is reflective consumption of the panaceas for a golden old age promoted in the marketplace and by self-serving professionals wearing the mantle of superior knowledge with an air of condescension. Finally, the weakest strategy of all is masochism, consisting of self-pity and fatalism. I think an amalgam of the positive survival strategies optimize aging person's progress through the trajectory of late life. I wish to emphasize and illustrate the heroic or activist strategy in my allotted time. I will be personally candid and revealing. I was born 70 years ago in poverty to a psychotically depressed mother in the East Bronx. At birth, I was diagnosed with rickets, a nutritional deficiency disease associated with weakened bones. As a young child, I was unable to stand and walk until I was 3 years old. Then I often fell and could not keep up with other children. When I started school, my mother's paranoia increased and she physically beat me daily. She struck me with straps and hangers, imagining I had done bad things or was having evil thoughts. When I was 10, the beating stopped after she underwent a botched mastectomy and could no longer hit me. Yet I'm here talking to you this afternoon as a successful human being by any conventional standard. Carl Jung noted that middle adulthood is characterized by further differentiation and integration of personality development. The threads of our earlier life experiences are deepened as preparation for the concluding segment of life. These last decades of my life have been quite Jungian. After having told you about my grim Dickinsonian childhood, let me bring some happy news. I lived in New York City, which had a marvelous free public school system from kindergarten through the baccalaureate program at the City College of New York. Then the The public libraries and museums were free and offered wonder and escape for me and my brother. I read books I could not buy late into the night, and I loved El Greco's View of Toledo and Rembrandt's self-portrait at the Metropolitan Museum. In the school library at the age of 9, I read Eric Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front and became a pacifist at the age of 9. When my mother was dying, visiting nurse service was there and referred me to free counseling at Jewish Family Service. I was helped to make sense of the irrational guilt feelings about my mother's death and to come to terms with repressed rage toward her. I later received a full scholarship from Western Reserve University for my master's in social work and was awarded federal funding for a doctorate from Columbia. I was not burdened by loans. The government saw itself as making an investment in me. Our national government tangibly supported my aspirations to work with the poor and the oppressed, and then to teach the practice of social work at the university. In short, all this societal largesse brings me here today. There are no words enough to express my gratitude. In my retirement, I look about me at a radically different world of growing economic disparities and diminished opportunities for young people. 12 years ago, I've moved back to the Bronx, the poorest borough in the city of New York, to a neighborhood that is ethnically, racially, and economically integrated, Kingsbridge Heights. It's quite different from Fortress Manhattan, both in income and diversity. In the Bronx, I see the police racially profiling male youth of color through the wholesale use of stop and frisk, as well as extra legal police entry into people's homes. I see the elderly worried about diminished pensions, Medicare benefits, and the possible demise of Medicaid and food stamps. I see women with children in strollers waiting in 2-block-long lines to enter the Melrose Center for food stamps and public assistance. I know mothers afraid for their sons' lives because of the police too quick use of their guns. As an older person, I've been deeply moved by the face-to-face contact with the young people of Occupy Wall Street and Occupy the Bronx. Young people are interested in my historic experiences in the peace movement, the Poor People's Campaign, and the AIDS movement. Strangely, my white hair gives them a sense of possibility and hope. I believe while old age may wound and humiliate, it also presents us with challenging opportunities for growth through the following. 1, release from the onerous obligations of family and work. 2, time for self-discovery and expression. 3, urgency to create a positive legacy. 4, self-acceptance through skirmishing with the absolute boundaries of a single human life. 5, clarity as to life's priorities while facing the limits of strength and energy. And finally, tenure, T-E-N-U-R-E, to be mad at the world for its follies, its corruption, its injustices, and not giving a fuck what might offend and disturb. In conclusion, I don't know if you're climbing from you the word fuck. I don't know. Okay. In conclusion, there's no stronger argument for heroic living in old age than the second part of Goethe's Faust. As Faust faces death, he experiences the commingled feelings of triumph gained through the exercise of freedom in the world and guilt over his failures. Yet he resolutely declares, "The world always has something to offer a man of worth. When he sees it, he should hang on to it and shape it accordingly. If there are ghosts about, ignore them and find his pleasure and his pain in moving on and on." With these words, I thank you.
These are tough acts to follow. I should have gone first. Hi, I'm Renee Sullivan, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. I have graduated from the young-aged cohort into the middle-aged cohort. My old age has become much more acceptable to me because I am a gerontologist. And so I do understand the bio-psycho-social changes that occur as I age. And having said that, it doesn't mean that my old age isn't hard. It's true, old age is not for sissies. I find it very hard to believe that the little old woman reflected in the store window as I pass by is me. And I don't tell most people my age, not because I'm embarrassed or ashamed. I don't tell my age because I think most people will then see me as my age and not see me for who I am, a person with a past, a present, and a future. Getting older has helped me become an existentialist, to live in the present moment, to be as aware and as conscious as I can be with each moment, because each moment may be my last moment, as it can be for each one of us here. So what has my own aging process taught me about practice with older people? I dislike the term elderly. I dislike the phrase golden age. I even dislike senior citizens. So I will talk about people and older people. If I knew then what I knew now, what I know now, how would my practice have looked different, and how will it look different now? I am currently, in private practice. And I also consult with social, I work part-time. I used to say I was retired, but now I say I work part-time because that's really what I do. And I also want to say that when I was younger, I fell into the field of aging. I did not choose gerontology as my field. I was assigned to work with older people when I was in graduate school. And I loved it, but that didn't stop me from going back to working with teenagers when my own kids were growing up. Then I came back into the field of aging with my dear friend Rose Dobroff at the Hebrew Home for the Aged in Riverdale. And that's where I found my whole self. So I'd like to share with you what, as a clinician, I did and did not do, and I hope it makes sense for you. I'll talk as myself and as a client. Treat me as you did when I was 40 years old, as a partner in whatever enterprise we're undertaking, not as an old woman who may not understand. Being patronized, paternalized, treated condescendingly is truly enraging. And I ask myself, did I treat all of my clients this way? Was I as egalitarian as I now know I want people to be with me? 2, search out my unique qualities. Each of us is different, and older people are the most diverse of all age groups because we have lived the longest and have had the most differentiated experiences. Don't make assumptions about me, but instead be curious about how I got to be who I am today. See me as a whole person with strengths and weaknesses. And what better way to learn this than through reminiscence? In the narrative, actively search for the strengths of the past which your client can use today in dealing with whatever she or he has to deal with. Reminiscence not only equalizes relationships, because the older person feels, I was once much more like you are, and I want you to know that about me. It not only equalizes relationships, it helps each of us as workers honor that person's particular survival skills and style. 3, I would focus more on what people want for the remainder of their lives to look like, and begin work with them on achieving these goals. Life isn't over till it's over. Most of us sitting here, I dare say, will live to achieve 85, 90, 95, and some of us will even live to be more than 100. So we have a long life ahead of us. We speak a lot about the search for meaning in life, and particularly in older age. I heard Bill Moyer speak several weeks ago, and he too spoke about the search for meaning. And what he said, though, is that people are not seeking meaning in life. I think what we're seeking is to feel the rapture of being alive. And that really struck chords with me, that the rapture of being alive is what we are all searching, yearning for. So this is what I would emphasize much more in my practice. What gives you joy? What do you have fun doing? What are the pleasurable things for you in your life? And by the way, I think people of all ages are searching for the rapture of life, not just old people. As when Connie Goldman was speaking this morning, the stuff she mentioned, I think are issues that people face throughout the lifespan. We are all searching for happiness and joy in life. 4, so many factors go into aging successfully and aging well. Adaptability, flexibility, humor, sociability, to mention just a few. But equally important, and we barely articulate this, is the ability to say, I need love and I need help. I believe we can learn to do this for ourselves because very few of us are able to say to others, I need love. We wait for it to come to us. And we can also help our people, our clients, the people with whom we work, to acknowledge, to recognize their needs, and for help and to accept help in meeting these needs. I don't want to be a burden, many people say, and I see this as a cover for the fear that nobody will be there to help them. The best help is help rendered as you wish it to be. 5, I come to new and deeper understandings of the mourning process all the time. I remember an early experience at the Hebrew Home for the Aged in 1968. Mrs. Rosen was standing in the hall as I was dashing to go to a staff meeting, and I said to her, and I was new at the home at that time, I said, how are you, Mrs. Rosen? And she hugged herself and she said, I'm so sad, I'm so sad. My daughter died. And she started to cry. And the tears welled up in my eyes, and I almost was crying with her. And I had to say goodbye and dash off to the meeting after we talked for a few minutes. When I got to the staff meeting, I said, Mrs. Rosen is in terrible shape. Her daughter died. And they looked at me and they said, Renee, she died, her daughter died 25 years ago. And that was the end of the conversation. Nobody said any more about it. About a month ago, I went to a concert where this Tchaikovsky's Pathetique Symphony was played. That orchestral piece was a piece my husband, my husband and I loved. And I found myself crying at that concert. My husband died 29 years ago. The pain of that moment was as sharp as the pain was all those years ago. The difference is that it doesn't last as long. You go on. But I have come to appreciate and honor the process of mourning and grief, and knowing that not only doesn't it end in a year, it doesn't end, it stays with you. It's there, and sometimes it's dominant, and sometimes it's not. But we need to appreciate that for our clients in a way that I don't think we ever did all those years ago. And we can mourn the losses of more than clients as well, of more than loved ones. You know, we lose many things in life that are so important to us, and we have a right to grieve for them. I would be more patient. I wouldn't move as quickly if I were back at the home. I can't move slowly. I'm still trying to teach myself to move slowly, but we need to take it a little easier. That would help. Friendship and the importance of friendship in people's lives. I could not live without my friends. My friends sustain me. And with my clients, much of the work has to do with families, much more than with friendships. And I think that's a big mistake. I would focus much more on the importance of friendships. And group services, by the way, are the best means I know of to encourage friendships. Small group services. Finally, I always was and still am an activist, a troublemaker, in my professional and personal lives. Activism keeps us alive and keeps everyone else on their toes. So there I was at Occupy Wall Street with a group called the 50-plussers, marching around the square, photographers interviewing us because they hadn't seen a group of old people down there before, an organized group. And it was energizing. I have not felt so good since I went to Washington on those marches. And it put me in mind of myself as a young social worker at the home in 1969, when there were threatened cuts in Medicaid, and I organized the residents to go down to the Hilton Hotel where Governor Rockefeller was speaking. And the director of the home, Jacob Reingold, sent a memo around after that to his staff saying, as you might know, some of our residents participated in a protest march this morning. They joined a group of persons protesting the recent legislative rate freeze by marching in front of the Hilton Hotel, where the governor's annual conference on aging is being held. And one of our women, Mrs. Sid Hockman, walked from the back of the auditorium to the front where Governor Rockefeller was standing, and she stood in front of him and she said, "You may not do this." That is life. And we need to live life as long as we're alive. I think I'd better stop there. Thank you.
I'm going to speak from here because some of you may have noticed I'm a little challenged, having had some recent foot surgery. I have both the pleasure and the pressure of following those 3 presentations you just heard. But I think I hope there's much of what I have to say that will resonate with my colleagues. First, I think it important to locate myself and tell you a little bit about who I am and my background. I'm obviously a black woman. I was raised in the Northeast in Philly, North Philly, which if you don't know Philadelphia, North Philly is the equivalent of New York's Harlem. And I grew up in a working class family, which family to me was my extended family until I went to college and was taught that that was your nuclear family and you have something else called an extended family. But up to that point, when someone spoke to me about my family, I thought of like hordes of people. And my maternal grandmother was the center of the family, emotionally and every other way that you could think of. And I believe that I chose to become a social worker because I used to think of it as due to my relationship with my grandmother, but I realized it was really the family's relationship to my grandmother and what that context that I grew up in, I think, and also my relationship with my paternal grandmother. And my father's side of the family has a very different, it's not the Southern experience, a very different cultural black group that I won't go into. But why am I telling you all of this is that I feel that I'm learning how to be old, and I'm aware of it. It's deliberate for me. I watch my relationships with elders, and I watch how they manage and how they carry themselves so that I can learn the way that I should do it. And I realized that I began that learning actually very young in my family. And I think that there's a very complex, and this is, I'm giving you my own sentiment, but also something that I discuss with my peers. I think there's a complex development occurring that has to do with both class differences, changes, and cohort differences. So what am I referring to? If we think about the reciprocity and the relationships between younger people and older people in a family in particular, as I grew up, it was always clear that you had the firm support of the elders. And that's a term that I do like. I see it as a little different from elderly, but your point is well taken too. It wasn't something that the elders had to say to you, although you would be praised. But you just knew that they were there for you. They could not do enough for you, particularly if you were doing the right thing with your life. And the right thing usually had to do with pursuing education, being involved in your faith, and certainly working. That was very important. So if you were doing the right thing, if it was a place to stay, a meal, a few dollars here and there, money was not in great supply, you knew that you had it. And you also got advice. And the advice would be very general. Hold on, you'll make it, for example. Just hold on. You can do this. You'll make it. You'll be okay. But they also felt empowered, that they had the right to tell you how to live your life. Very clear and simple. If they didn't think you were doing the right thing, you were told. That's not the way you should do that. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it this way. I think that is changing. And again, when as I speak with peers of mine, I don't know that we feel quite so comfortable about how much that next generation is going to be there for us. Not to say that we're not cared for and loved, but life is different. In families such as mine, more people have moved into professional class, have moved away, not living next to each other in that extended kind of situation as much. But also, we don't feel quite so comfortable to tell them what to do. Recently, I had a discussion with my husband about a niece who's having some, struggles in her life, and I really felt that, she needed to understand, X, Y, and Z. But I was concerned about saying any of this to her because perhaps she would become more distant. And my husband said, you know what? Our aunts and uncles were not worried about what we were going to feel. They told us what they thought we needed to do, and we were all the better for it. And I thought, gee, he's right. So I did have that conversation with her. But that tenuousness, I think, has sort of crept in. Now, of course, I continue to have relationships with elders in the family who we would call as professionals the old. Because to them, I'm still that younger one that needs to be told when she's got it right and what she really ought to be doing or what she's missing, and they need to fill that in for me. And I really do count on and appreciate their support. Professionally as well, I continued, I think, to learn how to be old by going into the field of gerontology. First, in the earlier years, I often asked myself, so, okay, you're marginalized as a black woman from a working class background, and now you choose to go into geriatric mental health. I mean, are you like addicted to being marginalized or what? So, but truly, the mental health world really did not want to know from aging when I started out. Just did not. I mean, to be an advocate, you'd see people's eyes glaze over, and they just waited for the next person to speak when you talked about the needs of older adults. And the aging world wasn't so terribly much better in terms of talking about mental health either, although aging providers would refer clients, obviously, who could not function in their services. But I really began to be sensitized to the rampant and extreme ageism. I do think that the demographic shift that we're experiencing now has perhaps taken the edge off of it in some way that it's hard to articulate. But as Connie Goldman said this morning, I mean, ageism is so pervasive in the fabric of this world that it's still quite a problem. And so I see it, my work having also carried through the theme of struggle, which again is something that I learned early in my family. For black families, it's an inherent assumption that life is a struggle. That's, as you live, you will be struggling. But you will also be successful and master many of those issues that you have to struggle through and develop some competence. Administration also really is about solving problems and removing obstacles. So in many ways, those come together. So I continue to learn how to be old, having begun to learn it in my family, continue to learn it through the field and through the profession. And I found a particular concept rather, useful. This is the notion of vicarious resilience. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with vicarious trauma. So vicarious resilience is a similar concept that essentially speaks to the inspiration and the positive things that we get from working with. Of course, the theory came from working with traumatized people, but I think it could be expanded to all of our work. What are the things that inspire us, and how do we grow from the work that we do with older adults? And my work with elders has taught me to be a better clinician and administrator, and a better elder, I hope. That's in process. But, you know, certainly as an administrator, you have to be resourceful. And I have countless stories of how resourceful my clients were, even though we might have started to work together with huge problems, seemingly insurmountable, but the resources that we drew on in the work weren't always resources provided by the program or the clinician. They brought their own resources. You have to learn sometimes just to go around an obstacle rather than drive right through it, and to seek opportunities. Much of what I was able to do in terms of developing services for older adults was not because ideally I was able to persuade someone. Sometimes I was able to go around someone. Sometimes I used the fact that they didn't care to pay attention. Great. So here's what I'm going to do. Coping with loss. As an administrator with any amount of years behind you, you know you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. And for those things that you lose that don't go your way, you give yourself a certain amount of time to grieve and to mourn, and then you move on, right? You have to hold on to a sense of hope. I'm talking about a 40-year span of advocating for older adults and developing services. It's unrealistic to think that everything you touch is going to work out. So you always have a sense of hope. It remains with me. I always do feel there's something else that can be done and something else that can be done better, and that if I can get the right folks together to support it, we can make it happen. You also get to reassess the dimensions of your own problems. How often have you worked with a client that you realize that the things that you lament in your own life, maybe they're not that bad, right? And you see what other folks are dealing with. So when I think about this question, which I thought was a very powerful question, by the way, if I knew then what I know now, a few things came to mind. I was first tempted to say that the first thing would be to just relax and accept that there will be highs and lows, but it's all going to be okay. But then I was torn about that because the fact that I wasn't relaxed is probably how I was able to do what I was able to do. So I think that's where acceptance comes in. You know, I don't have a lot of regrets to feel that there's something that I've done so terribly different or it wasn't the best way and I should do it differently. But I did think that, and Renee spoke to it actually, in retrospect, many of the teams I organized to work with older adults at the time were actually people who were in their 30s and 40s, mainly because that was the workforce. There weren't many people doing this work. Had I to do it again, I would have at least provided someone such as Renee as an advisor to those groups. And I want to say I had incredible teams of really smart, dedicated, caring people. We did amazing work. Many of us remain in friendship today because of the work that we did. But probably the wisdom of age now helps me to see that that would have enriched those teams for them to have a senior who was an advisor. If I have anything close to a regret, it's that I was not able to develop more professionals of color to move into the field of geriatric mental health. There are some that I'm incredibly proud of, but I wish there were more. There's not enough. There's really not enough. However, haven't given up on that. I've developed another advocacy group, and we're making that a priority. So, and actually, I would ask all of you to join me in that. In this room, I don't have to go into the statistics you know the demographic, and you know the need. So we all need to share in that. But lastly, I would say, overall, I feel I've been blessed, quite frankly, to be able to do what I have done. I have such an urgency, I think was George's term, about all there is to be done. I have still a sense of joy and hope and freedom at this stage of life from the things that, you know, when someone was talking about multitasking, well, okay, I do still multitask, but there's a freedom to choose as well at this point in life. And this world needs a lot. The injustice is so pervasive on so many levels, ageism being just one of them. So I feel actually like energized and ready to go, quite frankly. So that's my story. Thank you.
Now your opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and there's actually 2 microphones in the audience, one further up and one a little bit farther back, and we would appreciate it if you'd speak into those.
Hi, this is from Ms. Solomon. It's not really a question, it's just a comment. When I have a very good friend who's gay, and when I told him the quote-unquote going old is not for sissies, he says, well, I don't have to worry about that.
Could it I'm sorry, could it be repeated or could you?
Yes, she has a friend who's gay, and when she told him that getting old isn't for sissies, he said he didn't have to worry about that.
Okay. I actually wrote, about 15 years ago, I wrote a chapter in a book on the issues of aging and gay men. And it's interesting, there's, again, I haven't looked at the research, the most current variety of it, but gay men perceive aging very differently than straight people or whatever, of whatever gender. That it's really, and there's a lot of research, at least it was, to point to the age around 40 as being a terrifically critical period. I mean, for gay men in terms, particularly if the emphasis is on physical attractiveness and desirability. I frankly, my hunch is that research is vintage now because there's really been cultural changes, and that one now sees very charming, to me, charming situations of elders who are gay holding hands. I just noticed in my neighborhood, which is in the Bronx, a middle-aged to elderly lesbian couple walking together hand in hand. And I mean, that's delicious, you know, and so forth. So this may be changing, but the oppression of people who are gay gets obviously internalized and issues, and there are really wonderful counselors out there who are gay positive and so forth, for whom, to whom a visit of your friend might be helpful. You know, and there is an agency which you all probably know about, SAGE, and so forth. So I think if I'm correct, their age of recognition of aging is 50. So again, there are services. There's a wonderful agency called Callan Lord in Manhattan, which provides health care services and mental health services. So I don't know if that's a response to your question or not.
I would just like to say something in response to that. I'm a clinical social worker, and I happen to work with a large gay population. I have always done so. And one of the real issues now for gay men in their 70s, of whom I have several clients, is that they no lo- they have lost their cohort
Correct.
because of the AIDS epidemic.
Absolutely.
And they are aging, many of them are aging alone because they don't have their lifelong friends.
Correct.
And I think this is something we need to be aware of, and we need to incorporate into our practices, especially if we happen to be working with older gay people. Very important issue.
26 years ago, I led one of the earliest groups, support groups for gay men with AIDS, and I would say in that group there were 31 men, 29 died during the course. It was early in the epidemic. I would say 2/3 of them were men over the age of 50. So that would be that cohort you're talking about. So they have no historical cohort. It's bad enough for us who do have historical cohort to lose it, but to be, in a sense, depopulated of it is very tragic, and it'd be very interesting innovations to, in a sense, recreate that. And I think the arts and stuff may be doing that a bit, but something to think about.
I see a question up there or a comment. Hold on.
Hi, this is just a concrete kind of question that maybe I could ask each one of you. Renee mentioned the language, and I know growing up in the women's movement, how we always talked about, language being very important to us, and sometimes people got looser. I know it's just like a little interesting aside. I have a 16-year-old who uses the term boobs, and I say to her, I went through the women's movement. You don't use that kind of language. She says, we use that kind of language. Everybody does. So Renee mentioned the thing about elders, and you mentioned you use elders, and I think maybe in all of our practice, maybe we have the same issue about senior citizens, older adults. I'd just like to hear what each one of you think.
I'd like to say something about that. Actually, one of the great moments in my mother's life, the year she learned to use what she called, this on here. Is that better? Okay, good. Say one of the great moments in my mother's life, and I remember it vividly, was the year that she wanted me to teach her. We were having a lesson, how to use the F word, she called it. She wanted to know when to use it, how to use it, what was the right time to use it. I used it a lot, and the people who are here who work for me know that I use it pretty much every day in a variety of different contexts with absolutely no concerns at all. I won't use it up here. I'm not as brave as George. But I will tell you that my mom became an expert, and it was one of the great moments of her life. And she was not in the generation of women in the 60s at all. I mean, she was really born in the, much earlier. She died last year at 88. But that was a really freeing moment for her. I mean, the first time she used it without any coaching was like, wow, my student, she learned how to use this word. And it was really a moment for me and for her in two different ways. One, a moment for her, but also a bonding moment for us. Because the use of that kind of language for her was so foreign, and it was so natural for me, that when we got together and I heard her speaking in these sort of expletives, I was thrilled. Because it showed me that she'd become a woman had her own voice. So I think it's not to be overlooked. And I'm not a social worker. I'm one of the people here learning from all of you. But I will tell you that the use of language and how we use it and when we use it is really, really not to be overlooked. Words are the way we are human. I've always thought that it's language that makes us human. I have a great relationship with my golden retriever, and I love her to death. But truthfully, what makes her not us is that use of language, and I think it's really important. So I really think that's a fascinating thing that you said.
When I think of it, in naming programs, I would usually use older adults, because you're looking for a title that has dignity to it, but is real. I think most of us would feel like this golden stuff is just a little, strange. So you are an older adult. And my most recent program is a service for midlife and older adults. Because the issue then, too, is that it needs to resonate with your prospective clients. But when I think of myself in relation to someone, I do see people as being my elder. And culturally also, elder feels like a term of great respect. So, although I do, the way elderly is used does have a different connotation. Sometimes it feels almost commodified. Okay, that's,
Well, we don't talk about youngerly. Yeah. Why talk about elderly? Whereas elders are the most respected members of the group. And that crosses cultures. And that's
Yes.
a beautiful term.
I also feel, I mean, to play devil's advocate here, I feel there's something condescending about older adult, as if you're old, there's some question about your adulthood, moving back to childhood. I mean, I think it's amazing how the cultural meeting. So I say to somebody, but I'm really tired, or I had some orthopedic issue, and I'm on the bus. I'm an old man. I need your seat. You know what I'm saying? And I do see myself as an old man. And I think it's the most strange. Elder, I think, is a wonderful, and there's a word that also goes along with that in terms of traditions. Is sage.
Sage.
Sage is, and that's a special old person. And I love like reading the obituaries, and it says the matriarch of our family has died. We'll never forget her. That talks to a role, and I think that's wonderful. So I mean, we could find these honorifics or retrieve them from the past, but the degree of ambivalence and ageism that creeps into these either we make them glorify, we prettify them by like senior citizen, like you weren't a citizen until you became old. I mean, this is all. It's all. I mean, it's a lot of it is of a time and a place. But I'm an old man. I'm too old. I'm too old a man. I'm whatever, or a woman or whatever. But I think we should. I guess the trick is we should define who we are to other people, how we choose to be seen.
Yeah.
And different strokes for different people, different cultural traditions. And we should learn about other people's cultural traditions.
Other questions or comments? I'll come to you.
I just thought I'd share a cute little story about naming things. There is a group I work for, a church, and the group is a very vibrant, active group of women who make things, are always full of service. And the group was diminishing, and their name was something like the Senior Women's Guild or something like that. So one of the women got up and said, if we change our name, perhaps we will grow. And they're now known as the Feisty Ladies. And they are huge in numbers, and they are incredibly active, and one of the most wonderful support groups I have ever seen. So they redefine themselves in such a positive, wonderful way.
Others? Oh,
There's some move back.
At the risk of being a naysayer, I work with many, many old, infirm, very ill people. Do you think for them positive aging is a euphemism?
I think positive aging is bullshit. I mean, it's one person's perspective. I mean, I'm going to tell. If I gave a speech at Brookdale Center on Aging, a big seminar on successful aging, and this very distinguished person, he's dead now, it's unimportant. He wrote a book about successful aging, and it was based on assisted living condition with Supreme Court judges and all these. And he was telling everybody how they could be successful if they had money, power, prestige, and I think that to me, and I'm not just saying this to curry your favor, that a 96-year-old lady who gets up in the morning, bathes herself, takes care of herself, or gets assisted and makes her bed, that's positive aging. I mean, positive has to be in relationship to possibilities. When you see, I lived in Washington Heights with a lot of Holocaust survivors, German Jews. They would wake up in the morning and take their walk. 90s, that to me is positive aging. So it's really claiming what you're able to claim. But also, it's a very negative thing if you idealize it and people can't fulfill it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? To die with dignity, to die related to other people is positive aging. I mean, so, but there's a lot of money to be made on scaring people about aging, and I mentioned in what I wrote, panaceas of a golden age, or some makeup that'll get rid of this or that, or clear your hands of aging marks. Or there's a lot of bullshit out there on people's fears. I think we have to present heroic old people who, with all of life's travail and tragedy, are doing the best they can.
Yes.
That's positive aging, and that's golden aging.
When I speak of aging successfully, I'm really talking about aging with a sense of there is something that will happen in my life that will make it worthwhile, and that does make it worthwhile. That, to me, is what every person needs, regardless of age, and particularly when you are. Can you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. Is this working?
No, push it up.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying, aging, positive age, I don't like the term positive. Oh, it's all right. Positive aging means that there has to be something going in your life that will make it worthwhile for you to get up in the morning. And that's going to look different for each one of us. And that's the work of being old, to find that reason that makes your life worthwhile. And I do believe every person has to have that in order to get out of bed that day.
I just want to add one thing, because it would be remiss of me in my role as the CEO of the Alzheimer's Association not to just remind all the people in this room of the obvious, which is that, there's an enormous cohort out there of people, and there are these days younger and younger, actually, so it's not about age per se, for whom aging the way that we are discussing it here is not even a possibility. And I'm always concerned when I go to any meeting and we're talking about things as if there's a consistency in the population based on some number that sort of dismisses the fact that 50% of people over 85 in this country either have or will get Alzheimer's disease, and some very large number in their 60s and 70s, and we're seeing more and more of these people now, are developing something that will change this entire process. So I have nothing to say that is really, my staff could do more of this, that is actually a remedy or even an instruction or an idea, although I would say that we work on this all the time. But I will say that I just want to put it out there so that when people talk about the process of growing older numerically, people recognize that within the context of growing older numerically, there's broad variation, and some very large number of people are affected in ways that we can't even imagine. And we have to deal with those people also in a very special way.
So what I would add is I think this is another area in which those of us in the field of aging could contribute in a much larger way, because I think the issue is valuing all life regardless of age or circumstances. And if those of us who are now either professionally engaged or personally aging, if that could be our revolution, that would be a wonderful one, because I think that speaks to the heart of the matter. Why are we more concerned about positive aging than positive whatever that's about at any age, So I think there's an underlying value system there that needs to be confronted. So whether you're able to even feed yourself or not, your life has value. And that there are children who are chronically ill and cannot feed themselves, as well as elders. The workshop this morning, I don't know if people are here from that workshop, Diane Sherwood and caregiving. she presented a very poignant, was two poems. One was about an older person, essentially saying, I think, kind of what I just paraphrased, and another was, and it was sort of a complaint about wanting the nurse in the nursing home to kind of really see who I am, you know? And then there was the nurse's response. And I think that it speaks to how do we really value all of what people are and what people are able to bring, that, you know, just that. How are we changing as a society, you know, apart from the materialism and products, what you can produce and what you have, and so that I think is our challenge. And if we could do that, then the terminology and what we are calling ourselves and our programs and all would probably follow.
You're doing what I was going to ask you to do, which is to thank this wonderful group of 4 individuals.
Thank you all.
And this is the last time that we will all be together, so I wanted to just say again how much we appreciate your being here and helping us to make the colloquium happen. If there weren't registrants, it wouldn't happen. So you're a big part of the process. And the workshops this afternoon are scattered all over the building as they were this morning. 2 banks of elevators. One is for the 10th through the 18th floor. So if you're going up on a high floor, go to those. The rest go to the other side. And there are a couple rooms on this floor. Thank you.